Abraham Lincoln, yeah, Abraham Lincoln, he did the Gettysburg Address. Yeah, we talk about Abraham Lincoln, just like they talked about it last January, because that was the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, which happened to be a month after the largest mass execution in the history of the United States, signed by Abraham Lincoln, where 38 Dakotas were hung by the neck in Mankato, Minnesota, the day after Christmas in 1862. We get to celebrate, this will be the 151st anniversary of that glorious occasion. Largest mass execution in the history of the United States, signed by Abraham Lincoln. So, the great emancipator or the great executioner? I would argue that all his fluff with the Emancipation Proclamation and fluff about the Gettysburg Address was all political motivation. You can judge somebody by the stuff that doesn't get publicized. And the stuff that didn't get publicized was how the only reason 300 weren't executed on December 26, 1862, is because Lincoln was concerned how it was going to look. So he said, give me those numbers. I can't execute all that many. Let me whittle this thing down. So we whittled it down to 38. Largest mass execution in the history of the United States, signed by executive order. And these were 300, and I want to say 307 Dakotas, half-breeds, that's what they were called, and all these other nice words they were told, were tried in about a week as enemy combatants in a military tribunal. If any of this stuff sounds familiar, then as enemy combatants, and 30 of them were executed. The rest of them had the privilege of dying in prison, and they died in prison. They weren't let go. Now, why were they tried in the first place? Because at the very beginning of 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act, which opened up all of this territory for settlement by white people. And the Dakotas and Lakotas, they were all supposed to get paid. And they didn't get paid. They didn't get food, they didn't get paid. So the fact of the matter is, these people were pissed. And so they started pushing the people back out and raiding villages and stole food. Can you imagine the audacity of that? So that's what these people were tried for. They were tried as enemy combatants because they were raiding villages and killing people. And trust me, a lot of them were getting killed in the process too. There was a lot of animosity because you had angry Indians who had land taken from them, and then they didn't get the payment that they were supposed to get for the land or the food or any of that other stuff. And it would be years later, just like with the Trail of Tears. People don't realize that all of that land where all those Cherokees got marched off of, they never got paid for it until years, decades later. We have this, the same latent racism that allow the Washington Redskins and, get ready to go down the Trail of Tears, comments from high schoolers. This kind of mentality. And when you listen to some of the stuff that gets said, the patronizing way that even Barack Obama, when he referring to Native people. I saw one of the, in fact, I don't know if it's in this paper, it might be in this one, it talked about Obama's overtures to our people. Again, our special month. I cited the Murray Porter song. Murray Porter did a song called "Is Sorry Enough," and it refers to Stephen Harper's Prime Minister of Canada, his apology for the residential schools. These are just words. If you're going to make a proclamation for our special month and not have a meaningful conversation about the real issues, and you're still going to refer to us as domestic offended nations, or you're going to still refer to us as, when you're going to talk to us as if we're yours, when they make these comments like, well, our native brothers and sisters, like we're kept people, and that's the tone that exists in how we're referred to. The trust relationship. The trust relationship, it's not about a trust relationship. There were specific agreements that when millions of acres of land were given up, there were obligations that were supposed to be paid. Perpetual obligations, not just $4,500 worth of cloth. That's where the health and the welfare. When people do these assessments, and they do this a lot on the Canadian side, they'll talk about how many dollars per person is spent by Indian Affairs. They'll do the same thing on the American side. We're still there's still less money paid per capita in Indian country. And when you consider the fact that both, and on the Canadian side, it's even more definitive because they established trust funds for all, that so many billions of dollars were put into that it was supposed to fund a lot of this stuff. So it's not, and the trust funds were born out of mineral extraction, lands that were ceded, specific dollars. Well, it's the same thing here. So when people talk, there was a professor in Cornell, his name is Bob Venables. He used to say that Indians paid up. He said that they prepaid the tax. They prepaid it with their land. They prepaid it with their resources. I don't necessarily subscribe to that notion, but the idea was, we've done our part. Forget about the military service, forget all other stuff. We gave up way too much for this experiment people call the democracy that is the United States. And it's not even acknowledged. Forget about appreciated. It's not even acknowledged. And then when you do get some sort of acknowledgement, there's always these strings attached to it. I mean, I cite the apology in '94, the joint resolution by the House and the Senate signed by Clinton relating to the unlawful toppling of the Kingdom of Hawaii. And what a travesty that whole thing, right from not just from the military operation that it was, but right up to the whole process of statehood. The whole thing was fraud. And when the Native Hawaiians used that joint resolution and submitted that into court as part of some of their claims, the Supreme Court said resolutions have no legal merit. They're not an admission of guilt. Wait a minute, it says we're sorry. It says all the stuff that you did that was wrong, and that's not it. The Supreme Court says no, that's not admissible. So these apologies don't even have that to it. They aren't even an admission of guilt. They're just words on a paper. They are meaningless. I mean, you've got Stephen Harper who will apologize for residential schools, and there's no way that you can interpret residential schools on that side or this side as anything but the very things that fit the definition of genocide. Mm-hmm. And yet they won't use those words. So you're afraid of those words? That's what's missing in this conversation. So we can have the President of the United States blow smoke up our ass, and it can be this one, it can be the next one, it could be the one before him, and it's been going on. It's been going on. That's why we have a word. The word we use for the President is Ranlatakayas. People say that it means town destroyer. Paul Delaware was on my show last week, and he did a really good job explaining what Ranlatakayas means. He said it's like a dog, like a rabid dog, that just keeps tearing at the flesh, and just keeps tearing. And it destroys everything that can destroy. It just keeps tearing and ripping at the flesh. That's what we referred to George Washington after the Sullivan campaigns. But that's why we kept referring to every president, because it wasn't just George Washington. Thomas Jefferson, the whole Louisiana Purchase thing, and where they bought Indian land from the French somehow, the whole idea was that we're going to send all the Indians, us included. It was every bit, we're going to shove all the Indians over west of the Mississippi. The Removal Act didn't start with Andrew Jackson. It started with Thomas Jefferson, at least as a formal policy. I mean, it was always the idea of removing us. But it starts with the enlightened one, Thomas Jefferson. So you can go through Jefferson, and you can go through every president. And every one of them just kept ripping at the flesh. John Kennedy, 10,000 acres of Seneca land. Isn't that right, Agnes?
Yep, Kinzo Dam.
Kinzo Dam, 10,000. And you know what? He was sorry. They got letters down to the museum. Down in the museum in Allegheny, you can see the letters where he's sorry. But you know what? He wouldn't have been president if he didn't go along with it. So his political aspirations were more important than screwing over the Senecas. And he knows it. He admits it. He admits it. It says as much in those letters. Because if you recall the numbers associated with his race against Nixon, kind of close. He wouldn't have won. He wouldn't have been the President of the United States if he hadn't. And you know what? The Army Corps of Engineers said they had two better options than the Kinzo Dam. They had two of them. That wasn't the best option. In fact, if you recall, since the building of Kinzo Dam, they still had some flooding issues in Pittsburgh. So it hasn't exactly been fully effective either. But we can go right through Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt and I won't get the quote exactly right, but it was something to the effect, I would not subscribe to the notion that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. He says, but I would suggest that 9 out of 10 are. And I wouldn't want to look too closely at the 10th. So that's, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize. So let's be clear, but so Theodore Roosevelt was a Nobel Peace Prize, and he could say something as racist as that. So, and again, governor of New York, became president because of some special day in Buffalo, as a matter of fact. That's how he got to be president. So we can go through, and I talked about Abraham Lincoln. We can go through every administration, and it's still that same dog ripping at the flesh, ripping at the land, because it's not just ripping at the flesh. I mean that Sullivan campaign was about destroying the food. It was about George Washington literally used the words in his orders to Sullivan, "I want you to inflict terror on the Senecas."
A lot of people don't know what the Seneca or the Sullivan campaign was.
Sullivan campaign was that when the men were at Fort Niagara, he sent in John Sullivan to destroy Seneca villages. There were 35 Seneca villages, but it wasn't just Seneca villages. Onondaga, Cayuga villages, they were all destroyed. But primarily Onondaga and Senecas, because they were they had sided to some extent. And again, these were not decisions by the nations. There was no Seneca nation decree that they were on the side of the British. That's not the way it worked. That's the way history kind of tells it. There were Senecas that fought on the side of the British. There were Mohawks that fought on the side of the British. There were Oneidas that fought on the side of the Americans. But anyway. So the idea was to go through and not just defeat the Senecas. The whole idea was to destroy their lands, to destroy their fields, destroy their, don't even take prisoners. Then don't accept any pleas for surrender. They said, do not accept any of that stuff. We need to destroy them. They wanted generational destruction imposed upon the Senecas. They said, I want you to inflict terror upon the Senecas so they will know the level of their chastisement. So the first use of terrorism by the United States military, and I'm sorry, it is what it is. And then people say, geez, you always have all these negative things to say about American presidents, Well, sorry, it is what it is. I had a classmate of mine one time say, don't you have anything nice to say about any of them? Yeah, but that's already being said by people. I don't need to say those things. These are the things that people need to balance off. There needs to be balance. You need to understand that, that there's a downside to all of these individuals, and there's a dark side.